Okay, this is video number 2 on the Industrial Revolution. At the end of video 1, we were analyzing a political cartoon on Cornelius Vanderbilt, which you'll see on my exam and in future grades. Very popular political cartoon. And you were trying to analyze it and describe what you see and what is it trying to say, what's its message, identify the main idea. Now we're going to watch a short documentary on Cornelius Vanderbilt, and if you want, when you're done, you can go back, and if the video helped you understand the material a little better, and maybe it helped you interpret the meaning of the political cartoon, you can go back and add to it. So here is our short video on Cornelius Vanderbilt. Again, make sure you're following directions. These videos are not meant for you to be a passive listener. You're actively engaged. You're taking Cornell notes. You can use these notes on today's exit ticket, and also I'll grade these notes when I look at your notebook. If you're homesick, you're doing the exact same thing we're doing in class. You'll take your exit ticket when you come in.
Vanderbilt might have been the most intensely competitive of the capitalists of this era. He was something of a throwback in that he believed that by personal intimidation, he could conquer the market.
Vanderbilt would be ruthless in competition, and he was better at it than anyone else. He seized every possible competitive advantage that he could find.
Whatever it took to put your competition out of business, they were going to try to do it.
They want a war. I'll give them a war.
Vanderbilt's career was always centered on transportation. That means that he was involved in the most strategically important and ultimately the biggest industry of the 19th century.
Railroads allowed the industrial economy to boom in ways that it couldn't have before.
This was the key factor in the rise of the American economy in the 19th century, and that was Vanderbilt's business. The New York Central Railroad became the centerpiece of his empire. And it came to him as the sudden result of a skillfully executed campaign to get revenge.
I want you to close the Albany Bridge.
Vanderbilt, in essence, single-handedly erected a blockade around the nation's largest city, cutting it off from contact with the rest of the country. He was now asserting his dominance.
Ladies and gentlemen, this train will not be going any farther.
We're going to watch them bleed.
Vanderbilt had the advantage of millions and millions of dollars. And deep pockets are always an advantage when you're trying to gain control of a corporation.
Vanderbilt's empire, $100 million estate represented, would today be in hundreds of billions of dollars, perhaps even $1 trillion single-handedly. But in terms of raw power, no one today comes close. He was at the center of the rise of America.
Okay, so that was Cornelius Vanderbilt. We should have some notes on Mr. Vanderbilt. We should have analyzed that political cartoon and did our best to interpret that and identify the main idea. Okay, the next person we have, again, on your exam, I'm just going to show you this picture. You got to identify the person. You have to describe his achievement during the Industrial Revolution and how did this impact the Industrial Revolution, what he did. So who is this? This is Mr. Edwin L. Drake. His achievement. He's famous for pioneering a new method of producing oil from the ground. He drilled using piping to prevent borehole collapse, allowing for the drill to penetrate further and further into the ground. Previous methods for collecting oil had been limited. Pay attention to this definition. He wasn't the first one to try to collect oil. He just did it more efficiently and more effectively with his drill. Here's the impact that it had. This is going to help fuel the Industrial Revolution, literally and figuratively. I'm getting large quantities of oil and getting it quickly. This is a very famous picture here of Edwin L. Drake and the first oil well. I know it looks a little different than today's oil wells, but there is some similarities. Know this picture. It's a very famous picture of Edwin L. Drake's oil well in 1859. So now with Edwin L. Drake coming up with this drill, and he's also, besides the obvious impact of getting oil in large quantities, he has a great story of not giving up. Everyone was laughing at him. He was drilling with no success. They labeled it Drake's Folly, and what he was doing was crazy. He's stupid, blah blah blah. You know, the easiest thing in the world to do is point your finger at somebody. And when everyone was writing him off as a failure, after being very persistent and not giving up, even though his original investors had abandoned him, he did become successful. Unfortunately, his story doesn't end very well, as you'll see. But again, this is a very basic lesson on the Industrial Revolution. We just need to know who this person is, what they did, how it impacted the Industrial Revolution. So, Edwin L. Drake, we're going to see a short little biography on him, and it's actually going to give you a background on the history of oil. So, take that in, and it'll put Drake's accomplishments in perspective.
In 1852, a Canadian inventor named Abraham Gessner discovered how to make kerosene from crude petroleum. In an age when candles and whale oil provided the only light after sundown, it was a dramatic discovery. Borrowing a page from alcohol distillers, Gessner used a primitive still-type system to distill and refine crude petroleum by heating it and separating its various elements. One of those elements was kerosene, which he found burned longer and cleaner than whale oil.
The superiority of kerosene was not only in the fact that it was a better illuminant, but it was ever so much cheaper. Whale oil was getting extremely costly. Town gas, for example, about 1860, you could light your house with town gas for about $10 a month. You could light your house with kerosene for $10 a year.
Created over millions of years by heat and pressure, petroleum is formed when living things die and decay and are converted to carbon-based minerals. The Bible records that Noah applied petroleum to the ark as a waterproofer. 1,000 years before Christ, the Chinese were burning it in lamps. And by 1100 AD, Christian crusaders found they could set petroleum ablaze to make Greek fire, which they hurled at their enemies in battle. Early Americans gathered the black goo from pools where it had oozed to the surface. By that time, the principal use of petroleum was as a medicine.
Petroleum was thought to be good for rheumatism or for arthritis or as an eye salve, various kinds of medicinal uses.
As long as petroleum was limited to use as an ointment or toothache remedy, there was little reason for men to spend much time searching for it. A few hundred gallons skimmed off pools each year more than met the demand. But the discovery of kerosene changed all that. Within a year of Gessner's discovery, his kerosene works was producing 5,000 gallons a day, and the need for more crude petroleum became critical. By 1859, 34 startup companies were producing $5 million worth of kerosene annually. The rush to find oil, and with it, huge fortunes, was on. Among the fortune hunters was a man named George Bissell. Bissell heard that salt miners in western Pennsylvania were complaining that their digs were being contaminated by oil. Hearing the news, he hired Edwin L. Drake to investigate and determine if the region held any potential for profit.
Edwin L. Drake, I think, is one of the most fantastic figures in American industrial history. He was a railroad conductor, a hotel clerk, an agricultural worker. Here is a man who had no technical background at all.
Drake sought drilling help from some of the people in the area who were experienced salt well drillers. He found William Smith, known to everyone as Uncle Billy, and hired him at the royal sum of $2.50 a day to come to Titusville and help him drill this well.
Smith went to work in a pump house that Drake had bought months before. He began by building a kind of battering ram out of white oak, which was used to pound metal pipe into the ground. The crude method worked for a while, but the human-powered contraption was useless when they hit bedrock 39 feet down. Drake hooked a steam engine to the ram and continued to pound into the earth. For months they drilled in vain. Then, on August 29, 1859, with the project on the verge of cancellation, Drake came to check on Smith. He found the blacksmith and his sons not drilling, but standing guard at the site. Around them were tubs and barrels filled with oil. Drake had made the most important oil strike in history.
He had persistence, he had imagination, he didn't know what couldn't be done. So finally, after he got down to about 69 feet, he realized that there was something down there that you could see that was not water, it was not brine, and when it was pumped up, it was petroleum. And so that was the crucial breakthrough.
News of the find quickly spread. Thousands were drawn to the area to make their fortune at a time when oil was selling for $20 a barrel. Almost overnight, a new town sprung up at an oil field near Drake's Well. Appropriately named Pithole City, by September of 1865, the town had 15,000 residents.
By the midsummer of 1865, by July, Pithole had its post office opened up, and by September of 1865, it had its own newspaper. Pithole had over 50 hotels, and the boarding houses, there's too numerous to count. It was impossible to keep track of all the people, but the post office would handle 10,000 letters a day, and a good many of those went to the dead letter office due to the fact that so many people were in and out of Pithole compared with your other smaller towns around the area. Pithole was where all the excitement was at that period of time of 1865.
Then, in January of 1866, the wells began to dry up. Output fell from 6,000 barrels a day to 3,000. Within the year, Pithole was producing only 2,000 barrels a day, and by the following fall, the flow had become a mere drip. Fortunes that had been made overnight vanished just as quickly. Within a year, the town was deserted. A parcel of land that had sold for $2 million in 1865 was auctioned off for $4.37. Edwin Drake, the man responsible for the most important oil strike in history, died penniless in 1880.